So Jesus invents the ultimate sinner. Now, not every sinner is that bad, right? Not every sinner is that bad. But when one is that bad, it's pretty important to see how God treats him. Would you agree? Because how God treats the most extreme sinner is important for all the rest. Because if He can forgive the worst of the worst, that's important to know, isn't it? So let's go to the fourth point, a shameful repentance. Verse 17. When he came to his senses, finally a breath of sanity. Came to his senses? That's when repentance always starts, when you make a true assessment of your condition. He came to his senses, and this is what he said. How many of my father's hired men have more than enough bread? Well, I love that. I love that. How many of my father's hired men have more than enough bread? You say, what's such a big deal about that? Hey, I'll tell you. Hired men were day laborers. Misthos, the term referring to a day laborer. They didn't have a job. They didn't belong to the family as servants. They weren't craftsmen and tradesmen. They were the very lowest of the low. They were the minimum wage guys. They were shoeless. They were the destitute and the poor. And the Old Testament law, the Mosaic law, said you pay them at the end of every day because they set their hope on that. If they don't get that at the end of the day, they can't eat. So they were the people that stood around in the agora, that stood around in the village center. Those are the ones you remember that Jesus told the story about going into the town on the 6 a.m. in the morning, then at the 9th hour, the 3rd hour, the 6th hour, the 9th hour, and finally 1 hour, the 11th hour, taking them out to the harvest. And they all received the same pay. Well, those are the day laborers. They were the lowest on the socioeconomic ladder. And guess what? This young man remembered that his father gave hired men more than enough. What does that mean? He remembered his father was generous. He remembered that his father had compassion on the poor. He remembered that his father was sympathetic. He remembered that his father was good. And that is the foundation of why he goes back. Because he's going to have to eat crow. Big time. It's going to be humiliating to go back. Because when he goes back, according to Middle Eastern culture, and you can read some fascinating studies of this, when he goes back, the minute he enters that village, the whole village, which has been dishonored by his behavior, is going to take up the defense of that father's honor, and they are going to heap scorn and ridicule and mockery and condemnation on that man. They are going to defend the honor of that village and that landowner by heaping scorn on that son. And he knows that. In fact, in most cases, he would have to sit in the village for days while children mocked him and adults mocked him. And maybe after days of taking the scorn that he deserved, the father might grant him an audience, at which point he would allow him to kiss his feet or his hand and come no closer than that. And then he would publicly whip that boy before the whole village to return some honor to himself, after which he would lay out the terms of restitution, and there would never be reconciliation until there had been restitution. That's how it is in a legalistic system. You earn your way back. And restitution would have been pretty simple. You earn back exactly what you cost the family. Then maybe, after years and years of working at the wage, the minimum wage, maybe then, when you've made full restitution, the Father might grant you reconciliation. He knows that. He knows going back is going to be embarrassing, humiliating, agonizing, and hard. But he says in end of verse 17, I'm dying. What's my option? I'm dying. If I want to live, I have to go back. And this much I know. My Father is compassionate, and my Father is good. And my Father is generous. Verse 18, I'll get up out of the pig slop. I'll go to my Father. And I'll say to Him, Father, respectful, I have sinned against heaven, or better, I have sinned as high as heaven. I've piled up my sins as high as heaven. And you've seen it. Implication that the Word had come back. I am no longer, verse 19, worthy to be called your son. I'm not asking to be a son. I'm not asking that at all. And by the way, when he left, there would have been a funeral in the family. They would have held a funeral for him. He was as good as dead. So I'm not asking to be back in the family. I'm not asking to be a son. Just make me one of your hired men. Let me earn back through minimum wage for as many years as it takes what I've lost. See, that's all he knew. Because, hey, they were in a legalistic system where you earn your way to God. Here is the sinner come to desperation. Here is the sinner who comes to the end of his life. I am going to die. No other place to turn. I've got to go to the one I know is good. And no matter what it costs me, I'll work as long as it takes to live. It's reminiscent of Matthew 18, where the man who owed the unpayable debt came back when the king called him in. The king said, you owe me this unpayable debt. Remember what he said? I'll pay it all back. That's the culture. That's the culture in which legalism exists. That's all the religions of the world except the true gospel. They're all systems of works. You earn your way to God. You get reconciliation at the end of restitution. And you know, for the first time, the Pharisees are saying, well, it's about time somebody did something sensible here. This whole thing has been so bizarre. This is the first honorable thing this guy's done. He's going to go back and earn it all. And so in verse 20, he got up and he came to his father. He's on the way back, stinking like pigs. Gaunt, hungry, near death, stinking, wretched, foul sinner, commiserating with the wretched harlots of his foreign country. He comes back. You can imagine what he expected and what he should have gotten. Rebuke, scorn, mockery, condemnation. He expects it as he comes down through the dust toward that Middle Eastern village and toward the entrance, which would be where the first couple of little houses were. And then the story takes an amazing turn. But while he was still a long way off, hadn't reached the village yet, really important, his father saw him. What does that tell you? The father was what? Just looking. Just looking. And he saw him. And listen to this. He felt compassion for him. Oh, no, the Pharisees say, yeah, this guy's hopeless. Come on! How about a little anger, right? How about some tough love? This guy is just weak. He felt compassion, huh? Yeah, I did.